Welcome to the B Block Podcast. I am your host, Brandon Scott. I appreciate you for joining me. This is a draft reaction show. We are going to react to really the first round of the draft, I would say, is the part that I really want to get into. And obviously, the Texans did not participate in the first round, as you already know. So we're going to actually lead with what the Texans did because I want to get into all of it. I got a couple of thoughts on, I guess, the more national topics that pertain to the draft, and then more specifically, what the Texans did in the draft. And I'm actually recording this right as day 3 begins. And I'm not going to sit in here and react in real time to day 3. There'll be plenty of time throughout the week. I'll be on the radio. I'll be on Sports Radio 610, and I'll do some more episodes here doing a little bit more overall reaction to the Texans draft. And I'm going to have a column out on cron.com as well. You can check out what we're doing on sportsradio610.com, the Odyssey app, of course, our social media, YouTube, and all of that. And then, of course, I have a cron.com column recapping the draft, probably dropping on Sunday, somewhere around there. But I want to start with this because the thing that I think is most interesting about what the Texans did, or the Texans' approach, or I should say what I learned from day 2 of the draft when the Texans picked. And if you don't already know, they went with cornerback Kamari Lassiter out of Georgia with the 42nd pick. They went with Blake Fisher, the offensive tackle out of Notre Dame, with the 59th pick. And they picked Kalen Bullock Jr. from USC with the 78th pick. And that was actually the first time that they traded up. That was one of the surprises, right? One of the takeaways from the draft was that Nick Caserio did not move or did not trade until he got to that 3rd pick, until he got to the 3rd round. Then he moved up to go get Kalen Bullock out of USC, the safety. But before we talk about these players, one of the big takeaways, or the main takeaway for me, was Nick Caserio conceding that they were interested in a defensive tackle. Like I think that the Texans, at the very least, once day 2 started, and maybe even, who knows, we do know that they were trying to get up into the first round, that there was some conversation about them trying to get into the first round, and it didn't happen. But as far as day 2 goes, the thing that I'm most curious about is, what D tackles did they miss out on? What D tackles were they targeting? And how interesting it is to me that it turns out that once they did get to their pick, once they did get to number 42 and chose Kamari Lassiter, the cornerback out of Georgia, they decided to pick him over at least, let's see, 1, 2, 3 defensive tackles that would have made sense for them at the spot that they picked. And those 3 are, let's see, so Mason Smith goes to Jacksonville at pick 48, the defensive tackle out of LSU. He goes, 6 picks after Kamari Lassiter. So they liked, and to their credit, he was still there 6 picks later. The Texans liked Kamari Lassiter at cornerback more than Mason Smith at defensive tackle, more than Chris Jenkins, the Michigan defensive tackle that went to the Bengals. There was a run on defensive tackles here where, let's see, you got Michael Hall Jr. goes to the Browns with the 54th pick. The run was actually earlier than that, and that's what I'm most curious about. When Nick Caserio told the media afterward, and I was there, I was at NRG Stadium for the early part of day 2, but did not stick around long enough to hear from Nick Caserio. But I did check out what he had to say, and I found it interesting. We don't play a whole lot of audio here on the B Block podcast, but we're going to do it here because Nick Caserio, I thought, gave us some insight into what perhaps they prefer to do at the top part of this draft.
Yeah, we'll see. There's some opportunities there. There's a number of players that we liked, and we didn't have the opportunity to add them to our team. I think we're excited about the players that we've added. So, we've signed some players in for agency. We signed Foley. We signed Tim Settle. We signed Danico. We have some players that have some flexibility there in the front. So, like we talked about last week or whenever it was, if we had to go out there and play football, we'd be able to put a team out there regardless of whoever we drafted here. So nothing's really changed. So there will be opportunities, I'm sure, between now and September to add wherever we feel necessary. So if we feel there's an opportunity and we feel there's a spot that we need to add somebody, there's going to be players available. So we'll try to make good decisions, and if there's a situation that makes sense, we'll certainly pursue it.
So that's him answering a question about not getting a defensive tackle. And the run on defensive tackles early in the second round looks like this. Rook Orororo, the defensive tackle out of Clemson, goes to the Falcons. Johnny Newton, the defensive tackle out of Illinois, goes to the Washington Commanders. Skip a pick. Jalen Polk goes to the wide receiver from Washington, goes to the Patriots. You skip that one, and then you go to the Tennessee Titans and Tavondre Sweat. So 3 out of 4 picks there. Oh, wait a minute. Braden Fisk after that. 4 out of 5 picks there. All right, so that's the run on defensive tackles. Rook Orororo to the Falcons, Johnny Newton to the Commanders, Tavondre Sweat to the Titans, Braden Fisk to the Los Angeles Rams. Who was the player, or is it all of them? Would they have taken any of these players if they had been able to move up? You look at, the Philadelphia Eagles trading up to go get Cooper DeJean, right? They're the ones that were able to make that happen. They did the trade that clearly the Texans were not able to do. And who knows how, like enthusiastic they were, or how like fervent they were in trying to get one of these trades or trying to get one of these guys. But you heard Nick Caserio right there say that they liked the number of players and they weren't able to add them to their team. That was one of the biggest takeaways, if not the biggest takeaway for me from the draft, is that they missed out. We had identified the positions of, let's not just say need, but maybe even of priority going into this round. And they were defensive tackle, cornerback, and maybe safety or linebacker. They were mostly on the defensive side of the ball. A lot of talk about wide receivers, but that was because of the number of wide receivers that could potentially be available to them, and sort of this irresistibility factor of, hey, if you can go get a first round caliber wide receiver in the second round, knowing that 2 of your top 3 wide receivers are going to be free agents or possibly could be free agents at the end of the year, then that's not a bad route to go. That's not a bad decision to make. But clearly that wasn't a target. They go cornerback, offensive tackle. Surprising. Look, Blake Fisher, pleasant young man, very good at right tackle, playing for Notre Dame over the last couple of years. But that's a surprising one. And then they go safety, kid out of USC, Kalen Bullock. These are positions, okay, with the exception of offensive tackle. I credit them with cornerback. I credit them as safety for addressing those positions. But I'm intrigued by the players that they picked, but also the players that they missed out on. Absolutely intrigued by the players that they missed out on. Like I was always going to follow what Tavondre Sweat was going to do, being a kid out of Texas, being a kid out of Huntsville. All of the conversation around him. Johnny Newton is somebody that was mocked to the Texans in the first round quite a bit before they traded their first round pick. I was always going to monitor him. Braden Fisk is somebody that we talked about a lot as being a possibility for them at 42. All of these guys I'm intrigued by now. I'm even more intrigued by their careers. And then certainly on the back end of that, when you talk about taking Kamari Lassiter at 42 overall, and then picking him over the defensive tackles that went after that, right? Mason Smith, Chris Jenkins, okay, that Michael Hall Jr. That to me is interesting. It is an interesting dynamic in how that whole thing played out. Now, on Kamari Lassiter specifically, really good player. I'll even let you guys hear from Nick Caserio on Kamari Lassiter in just a second. But I want to say that for one thing, he mentions him being a possibility for them in the slot. I think that's that was kind of an underrated need for them going into the offseason. And then they re-signed Desmond King, and we kind of just like say, all right, well, wasn't a lot of thought to that. It's been a lot of conversation about the outside corner opposite of Derek Stingley, whereas, and that's a lot because there's a lack of belief in the guys that they signed, right? Jeff Okudah and C.J. Henderson, guys who were drafted high a few years back and have not necessarily lived up to those expectations, but are talented dudes. Okay, are talented dudes. So cornerback is going to be really interesting, and we'll get to that in just a second. The state of the Texans cornerback position. But another thing about this Kamari Lassiter pick that was interesting to me, aside from them clearly missing out on a defensive tackle, who it is, we're not exactly sure, or could it be a group of these guys that I just mentioned? But I look at the guys that went after Kamari Lassiter, and there are, let's say, a couple of picks later, starting from Edrin Cooper, the linebacker out of Texas A&M, going to the Green Bay Packers at 45, all the way to these a couple of these defensive tackles that I just talked about. So you got Edrin Cooper, the linebacker, who, look, it'll be interesting because I think that's a player that could have helped the Texans. Jonathan Brooks, the running back. I'll say this about all of these players. They're all either players that I would have more expected the Texans to pick or would have preferred. Either expected or preferred. These next 5 players. Edrin Cooper, linebacker out of Texas A&M, goes to the Packers. Jonathan Brooks, running back out of Texas, goes to the Carolina Panthers. Tyler Nubin, safety out of Minnesota, goes to the New York Giants. Mason Smith, defensive tackle out of LSU, goes to the Jacksonville Jaguars. And Chris Jenkins, the defensive tackle out of Michigan, goes to Cincinnati Bengals. All at positions that I think the Texans could have stood to either upgrade or add some depth to. Of course, cornerback is included in that. But I do wonder if these are, 5 better players that ended up going after Kamari Lassiter, who I do think is a good pick. I just wonder if it's going to be exactly the right pick. In terms of cornerback, like I give the Texans credit for this. I'm glad they addressed cornerback because I thought they needed to. And it looks like they were trying to trade up more than likely for a defensive tackle. But even the possibly preferred cornerbacks went right ahead of Lassiter. We talked about the run on defensive tackles. Well, the Eagles trade up to get Cooper DeJean. The Saints draft Kool-Aid McKinstry. And then there's Kamari Lassiter, who at that point you can say, if you're going for cornerback, is the right pick. I think you can fairly say that. The question is that a better pick than Edrin Cooper at linebacker, or even Jonathan Brooks, injured as he may be, at running back? Tyler Nubin at safety, maybe if you really, really like Kalen Bullock, as it seems like they do, then maybe you pass on that. But then there's this question about the defensive tackles, Mason Smith, Chris Jenkins. So that's what they passed up on to draft Kamari Lassiter, who, look, if they pick one of these defensive tackles and they're everything that you want them to be, they're out there either starting or at least contributing to your overall defensive line rotation. Kamari Lassiter's got to go out there, and if he's going to play on the outside, he's got to beat out Jeff Okudah and C.J. Henderson, who I have to think have the inside track on being the corner opposite Derek Stingley. Or he's the slot corner, and he's competing with Desmond King. So I don't know exactly how that's going to play out, but I will let you hear now from Nick Caserio on specifically addressing the cornerback position and drafting Kamari Lassiter.
Yeah. I mean, it starts with Coach Smart and, the program that he's put together, he's assembled. I think when you look at the number of players. I mean, I don't know how many Georgia players were drafted today, but it was a pretty significant amount. They had a number of players that played dual roles. I mean, Tyke Smith, who was picked, Bullard, Kamari got picked. Lassiter is position flex. He's played in the perimeter of the formation. He's played inside the formation. He plays with a linebacker type mentality. I mean, he's a corner, but he tackles. He's tough. He's physical. I'm sure there'll be a question about his speed and how fast he ran, but he's not slow. So, like, the speed really wasn't a concern of ours. So, the time's the time, but, like, we're drafting football players. You know, we're not drafting track teams. So, I know speed's important. I'm not saying speed's not important, but we don't feel that that's an issue for this particular player. And when you watch him play in the SEC, you don't walk away and have that concern. So, he's physical. He's tough. He tackles. He has position flex. He's well coached. I'd say Kirby's as good of a coach, and probably, you know, him and Coach Saban are probably good as secondary coaches from a technique standpoint, how they play the ball. He played a lot on the line of scrimmage. You play a lot of press. You know, we have a little bit more flexibility.
Yo, party foul on my part. I really just realized that I only had the volume up but so much on that clip. So we're going to play it again. Y'all forgive me as I try to produce this bad boy. Party foul for sure, but let's do this again. Why don't we?
I mean, yeah. It starts with Coach Smart and, you know, the program that he's put together, he's assembled. I think when you look at the number of players, I mean, I don't know how many Georgia players were drafted today, but it was a pretty significant amount. They had a number of players that played dual roles. I mean, Tyke Smith, who was picked, Bullard, Kamari got picked. Lassiter is position flex. He's played in the perimeter of the formation. He's played inside the formation. He plays with a linebacker type mentality. I mean, he's a corner, but he tackles. He's tough. He's physical. I'm sure there'll be a question about his speed and how fast he ran, but he's not slow. So, like, the speed really wasn't a concern of ours. So, the time's the time, but, like, we're drafting football players. You know, we're not drafting track teams. So, I know speed's important. I'm not saying speed's not important, but we don't feel that that's an issue for this particular player. And when you watch him play in the SEC, you don't walk away and have that concern. So, he's physical. He's tough. He tackles. He has position flex. He's well coached. I'd say Kirby's as good of a coach, and probably, you know, him and Coach Saban are probably good as secondary coaches from a technique standpoint, how they play the ball. He played a lot on the line of scrimmage. You play a lot of press. You know, we have a little bit more flexibility in our coverages, so maybe some of the things that we are going to ask him to do are conducive to his skill set. So, good football player. He's probably one of the top, I would say, makeup kind of players that we identified throughout our process. He's a football player, so we're drafting football players because we're trying to put together a good football team. So I'd say that's kind of where he fits. Yeah.
So that was him, and he's addressing to there the issue of speed. There was quite a bit of conversation in the Texans media workroom about Lassiter only running a 4.6 in the 40. But that makes me also think about him in the slot. That to me is the underrated part about the pick. It might be underwhelming for some people, but I think the underrated part about it is that Lassiter might very well be their future answer in the slot, you know, as their nickel corner. It could very well be the case. We'll see. Like, the way he talked about him being physical, being a football player, not being slow, you know, and having the ability to play inside. Like, I'm very intrigued to see if, and keep in mind, they obviously brought back Des King, brought him back after letting them go last year, brought him back during the season, and then brought him back again this offseason. But they did let him go last offseason, or last the last time they built a 53-man roster, right? That they opened the season with a 53-man roster. He was not on it. Very surprisingly, and they brought him back again. But I think that does tell you something, that's a position that they feel like they need to address for the future. We'll see how that plays out. I also realized while listening to that audio that if it was as low as it was before, then that means y'all probably didn't hear what Nick Caserio said about the defensive tackle position. So that's 2 party fouls. Man, I'm not feeling good about that, but I'm going to play that shit again because we got to get it right.
Yeah, we'll see. There's some opportunities there. There's a number of players that we liked, and we didn't have the opportunity to add them to our team. I think we're excited about the players that we've added. So, we've signed some players in for agency. We signed Foley. We signed Tim Settle. We signed Danico. We have some players that have some flexibility there in the front. So, like we talked about last week or whenever it was, if we had to go out there and play football, we'd be able to put a team out there regardless of whoever we drafted here. So nothing's really changed. So there will be opportunities, I'm sure, between now and September to add wherever we feel necessary. So if we feel there's an opportunity and we feel there's a spot that we need to add somebody, there's going to be players available. So we'll try to make good decisions, and if there's a situation that makes sense, we'll certainly pursue it.
All right. So again, the big takeaways from day 2 of the draft and the Texans' first pick, based off of what we just heard from Nick Caserio, that they were targeting a defensive tackle, or at the very least had defensive tackles in mind that they would have liked to have drafted and were not able to add to their team. Who is that player? Not exactly sure. Not exactly sure that it matters, because it will be worth watching all of them, all of the ones that they missed out on, the defensive tackles that were drafted before the Texans picked at number 42. Rook Ororo, Johnny Newton, Tavondre Sweat, Braden Fisk. Any of these guys potentially could have made sense for the Texans to move up to get, could have made sense to be on their team, and they weren't able to get them. So that was an interesting revelation. And then, of course, you look at this run of cornerbacks when they do pick, well, they get the third shot at it. Cooper DeJean goes to the Eagles. Kool-Aid McKinstry goes to the Saints. Kamari Lassiter then goes to the Texans. But it also means that they passed on some really good football players, namely Edrin Cooper. The ones that interest me most are really Edrin Cooper and Jonathan Brooks. I think they could have stood to added a running back of Brooks's caliber. They might still do so. I'm recording this again as day 3 is beginning. But Jonathan Brooks would have interested me. I didn't think that they were ever going to draft him, but it would have interested me. Edrin Cooper, I think, could have been a really good player for them. And then just passing on this next run of defensive tackles, Mason Smith, Chris Jenkins, and Michael Hall Jr. Now, maybe I should have mentioned this one earlier. The most interesting dynamic here for me is Kamari Lassiter to the Texans at 42, and then 10 picks later, Adonai Mitchell to the Indianapolis Colts at 52. They are former teammates at Georgia. They won 2 national championships together, I believe. And, of course, Adonai Mitchell ends up at Texas at the end of his college career. But they are now former teammates who will be rookies in the same division playing the opposite position. So to me, and I don't know if they're going to necessarily ever line up against each other. I don't know where either guy is going to exactly fit on the depth chart going in. So it's not like this is going to be a head-to-head player for player comparison per se. Like Adonai Mitchell versus Kamari Lassiter. I don't know if it's going to be necessarily that. We'll see how things play out and what their roles are on their respective teams. But I do find it interesting because, again, I mentioned earlier that wide receiver, while a luxury item, did make sense in some cases because of the caliber of wide receiver that you'd be able to get at that spot. And there you are at 42, where Adonai Mitchell is still on the board. And he turned out to be on the board for quite a bit after that. You almost could have got him with your second round pick, damn near. He goes at 52 to the Colts, to the division rival, the hated Colts. And he's there. I immediately thought about this and said, hey, like there are parallels here, but the main one is, hey, man, Did the Colts just get one of the steals of the draft? Did the Colts just get one of the steals of the draft? Because I think that Adonai Mitchell is a first-round caliber wide receiver. And he went with the 20th pick in the second round to the Indianapolis Colts. Dude, that's a steal. That's a steal. And it is a little bit bothersome if you're a Texans fan to watch the Colts not only get a steal, but get a steal with a player that was available to you at that spot, is local, Adonai Mitchell, Mo City Mitch, from the crib, and obviously would have, at least in my opinion, would have elevated your team. Now, the league made a decision on Adonai Mitchell and decided that, with the first 50 some odd picks, that they wouldn't pick him. But that the Texans are one of those teams not having a pick until getting to that position, and until 42. What Nick Caserio talked about in being able to already field a team, already having a lot of the key pieces to your team in place, and passing on that, with the underrated around the corner need to address wide receiver kind of just lurking there. That is going to be interesting to me. If Adonai Mitchell is going to make everybody who passed on him ultimately pay. I think he's a really good football player. Now, there was a lot of conversation about, his diabetes, which I'm sympathetic to, obviously, as a diabetic myself, and also some chatter out there about his attitude. And I did find Chris Ballard's comments interesting. You guys can check them out there. You can search this on social media or anywhere and find what Chris Ballard had to say about the Adonai Mitchell slander, if you will, pre-draft slander, if you will. I will say that I didn't feel like Chris Ballard was the right person to make the point. Like, I agreed with what he was saying, that it's ridiculous how some of these guys get picked apart, and in a lot of ways unfair. Hey, put your name on it, or really just shut the hell up anyway. Like we don't need a lot of the pre-draft analysis and slander that we get. It adds value to nothing, and at best hurts players, hurts teams, hurts the process overall. But I also don't feel like Chris Ballard is the right one to make the point, because and this is why. He's sitting there talking about how, it's unfair to the kid and defending the kid, which I guess you can appreciate. But he's also like not acknowledging, and maybe I don't blame him for not acknowledging, but this is why I wish he just maybe wouldn't go as hard on it. He benefits from this nonsense that surrounded Adonai Mitchell. Chris Ballard does. Benefits from the nonsense. Absolutely does. He slips all the way down. Adonai Mitchell is available to you at 50, at 52, and he probably should have gone either in the first round or certainly very early in the second. And you get to pick him with the 20th pick in the second round. You benefited from this. You get to pay him less. You were able to pick your guy in the first round. Obviously, you got Lassiter in the first round. That's what you preferred. That's what you prioritized. And then you didn't even have to do anything but just kind of allow Adonai Mitchell to fall to you. I don't believe they traded up to get him. You just allow him to fall to you. That's, or did they? Maybe they did trade up. I actually don't have. That's my mistake for not actually having the trade scenario there, because that is a traded pick of some sort. But either way, 52 is a steal for Adonai Mitchell. And again, that's the encouraging part, to feel like they got the steal. The Colts got the steal. Your division rival got the steal for the local kid who was available to you. And the guy that you picked feels like a fine pick. I just said it. I think that an underrated part about Kamari Lassiter is that he might be their answer at slot corner. just in case they don't want to do the Des King thing anymore, which I have no idea what the appetite is for that. But he may be the answer. He's obviously younger, which is another point about all of these picks, from Kamari Lassiter to Blake Fisher uh, to uh, to Kalen Bullock. All of them are either just turned 21 years old or are about to turn 21 years old. But the only issue with the Lassiter pick and the dynamic here the parallel that I'm trying to make here with Adonai Mitchell, the Colts feel like they got to steal. You don't really feel like you got to steal. It feels like a solid, fine pick. I know my guy Landry talked about it being being underwhelming and that sort of thing. And that was the sense that I got from quite a few people, just being underwhelmed by these first few picks. But that is the more interesting thing to me, is that the Colts got the steal, the local kid. The Texans don't feel like they got any like steals, like they like really, you know, just it felt like fine picks, fine picks. But Kamari Lassiter, I'm not mad at it. The benefit, the cool thing about this draft was going into it feeling like you couldn't really do a whole lot of wrong. Like you couldn't really you didn't feel like you could hurt your team because you had already developed a team. Nick Casario talked about that. You've got a team that you can go out there with. So that part of it is cool. That part of it is okay. We'll see how things go with the Texans in the cornerback position. It should be a real interesting competition once we get to camp. Now, Blake Fisher, right tackle out of Notre Dame, started at left tackle, was actually the first true freshman left tackle to start a season for Notre Dame, but then he got hurt pretty quickly. By the time he came back, he was the right tackle, and Joe Alt was their left tackle. But really cool dude to talk to. I got to chat with him on the Zoom after they picked him. He was very, very complimentary and is clearly close with Jared Patterson, Texans rookie offensive lineman from last year, also from Notre Dame. So they played together. They were teammates at Notre Dame. Looking forward to them like reuniting and all of that. But as far as that actual pick goes, it was the most surprising. It is probably the most controversial that you're going to have. Kamari Lassiter is a fine pick. I think he's going to be a fine player, and it's probably more than likely going to contribute to them in some form or fashion. We'll see if he lives up to being a second-round pick. I could very well see how he does, given his background. But I don't feel like Kamari Lassiter in any way is a controversial pick. It's a fine pick. Blake Fisher might turn out to be a fine pick, as we're certainly a fine young man. Like from just chatting with him, seems to be well put together and have his head on straight. And I really like just sort of his story. But picking him in the second round, a tackle at all, is very, 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 very interesting to me, because I know this was a little bit of a conversation going into the draft that we were having on the radio, or at least I was listening to the Drive have it on the radio. Whereas I know my guy Sean Pendergast and Clint Sterner, both of them were like, "Yo, no, if they draft a tackle out, in the second round, I'll blow a gasket." Basically, I'm paraphrasing, but that was their opinion. And my guy Ron is like, "Nah, man, I could understand that. You can get out of the Titus Howard and Laramie Tunsil deals within the next couple of years, and maybe you want to already have your succession plan." Could totally understand it, wouldn't have a problem with it at all. That was his position. My thought was, I don't know how much of a problem with it I've got, but it is something that presents more questions than answers for me, because drafting a tackle in the second round for the Texans, to me, is it feels like, to me, like they're hedging on the tackles that they already have. Like, it presents the question of, how much do you believe in these guys after you re-upped them or you gave them extensions? And of course, there's no reason not to believe in Laramie Tunsil. I know everybody gets frustrated with the false starts, but that's an elite left tackle. Like, You can argue with the facts all you want, but the facts going to still be the facts. Laramie Tunsil is a very, 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 very good football player. Titus Howard, I think, is also a very good football player. He's not Laramie Tunsil, clearly, but I think he's also a very good football player who has been grossly mismanaged. I've talked about this ad nauseum. But since he has been grossly mismanaged, it has presented the question, okay, and how does it affect you? How does it affect you as a tackle? Okay, like I think that Titus Howard is a good tackle, but how does it affect him as a tackle if he's got to spend so much work at left guard and not honing in on being a tackle? He only gets to play his actual position every other year because you're so enamored with his position flexibility that you want to have him bail you out at guard every time you lose a guard. Like, that's the issue. That it presents more questions than answers, because in an ideal world, given their contracts, you shouldn't have to, at least I thought, that the Texans shouldn't need to draft a tackle for at least another draft, like next year at the earliest, and probably the year after that, unless something goes terribly wrong. Like you need swing tackles, at least one, probably a couple of swing tackles. But in the second round, I wondered about that. I really did wonder about that. Are they hedging? This is either depth or you're hedging, or it could be a combination of both. But it was an interesting pick to me. Now that I've got everything actually playing correctly on the correct volume. Sorry again for that. Let's hear Nick Caserio talking about what went into drafting Blake Fisher, the offensive tackle out of Notre Dame.
Good football player. Started his career at left tackle. Moved over there to right tackle when, all moved to left tackle. So I think we've always been a big believer you can't have enough tackles on your football team. So when you look at kind of over the last however many years, so whether it's Charlie Heck, whether it's George Fant, whether it's Jones. So, Titus and LT are good football players. You need three or four tackles that you feel can go out there and play. I'd say in Blake's case, 6'5", 6'5.5", 315 pounds, long arms, plays strong, plays physical, played against good competition, well coached. I'm the offensive line coach, former offensive line coach at the University of Wisconsin. So played with JP. So, I think our program will benefit him, but you can't have enough tackles in your building. Right now we have, really four, including Charlie and David Sharp, who we signed. Blake is another tackle, but we're going to carry probably four tackles. So you're going to need three, and you all have seen us play. At some point, they're going to have to play. Even going back to 22, we had to play multiple tackles. So, LT didn't play, and then we had to move Titus over, and then Charlie played. So you're going to need tackles. So can't have enough good ones on your team. And I'd say once we picked Blake, I don't know how many offensive linemen went after that, but it was close to double digits. I don't have the exact count, but it might have been 6 or 8. So, I think Rosengarten went, the kid from BYU went, Goncalves from Pitt went. So, I'd say those teams have tackles as well. So you need 3 tackles. You probably need 4. You might need more than that. So, here's another young player with experience. There's a lot of good qualities and traits. That was the reason behind the pick. Yeah.
So I get his point about never having enough tackles, or you can't have enough good ones on your team. That's a fair point. I would argue, though, that last year their issue was that they didn't have enough guards and that they had too many tackles, and that one of their best tackles just so happened to be the guy that they felt like best doubled up as a guard. And that has been the case for a couple of different times now. And they ended up having a surplus of tackles and not enough guards. That did happen last year. I'm not saying that they should have drafted a guard. I don't even have a guard in my mind who I wanted them to take. I'm still hoping that they can figure it out with King and Green. I know that's a very, at this point, dangerous hope trafficking thing to do, but that's where I'm at. But the tackle thing still is surprising that you would use a second round pick on a swing tackle. it feels like you should be able to find a swing type. Like last year, ideally George Fant would have been your swing, or I know they ended up getting him. Uh, like it is kind of they were getting tackles left and right. They were kind of desperate with their whole offensive line being decimated last year. But you found George Fant last year, and you already had Laramie Tunsil and Titus Howard on your team. Going out and drafting one in the second round is surprising because I do feel like if yeah, and that's why I called it hedging. It means like what are you telling me really? Because I know he was complimentary also in that press conference about Titus Howard and him at tackle. But what are you really telling me about these players that you've invested so much money in if you're now investing? I mean, think about that. That's back-to-back years now where they've invested a second round pick on the offensive line. You like it with Drew Scruggs because you feel like you needed a center. You didn't feel like you needed a tackle, at least not in the second round. So I'm not mad at it because of the whole they can field a team and you know it's a at that point you are operating from a position or a point of luxury. Like I will say that I do believe that, but still surprising to me. Let's see here. I want to actually go back. Of course, of course, this isn't working. But yeah, no, he seemed. I like the whole. Hey man, I'm going back basically with my big bro JP, and like the fact that okay, I hadn't even thought about Jared Patterson a lot since his injury, or a ton maybe this offseason. But there is another potential answer right there at guard. You know, everybody's talking about Kenyon Green and hey, is like like is this going to be comeback season for Kenyon Green and all of that? But Jared Patterson was, I thought, decent at center when he had to play, and also plays guard and center. So we'll see how that works out. Um, don't have a problem with the Blake Fisher pick. Just found it, I would say, maybe a little bit confusing. This is the one that maybe has people the most excited. Kalen Bullock, the safety out of USC. Now he's 6'2", 6'3", a rangy, wiry safety, makes plays. Uh, really a free safety, or really maybe even has some cornerback ability, 4.4 speed, really overall a playmaker. He was their leader. And look, USC defense has been a punchline for a couple of years now, but he was their leader in interceptions 2 seasons ago and was right up there last season as well. Like this is a guy that flat out makes plays, has a little bit of a slight frame, and can kind of get abused in the run game a little bit. But I was mentioning this on Twitter/X not too long ago that shout out to the Texans and D'Amico Ryan specifically for helping improve their run game. I'm hoping that their wiry, skinny safety doesn't have to factor into it as much, and he can go out there and make plays in the passing game because, as Nick Caserio mentioned, you do need to cover. And they were injured at safety or struggling to make plays in the passing game at safety last year. So I like that pick. I like that pick. And it is worth pointing out. It is worth pointing out. I think Pendergast pointed this out as well. The Texans in these third round picks, man. The Texans and their third round picks, not bad. Not bad. You think about it. Nico Collins. All right. Christian Harris. Christian Harris was a third round pick, wasn't he? And Tank Dell. I think Christian Harris was a third round pick. I'm pretty sure. So those are the third round picks of the last 3 years. All starters, all really good players for you. And then I would even throw, I'm pretty sure Jonathan Grenard is not the same regime, but that was another one. Like third round, there's a little magic there with the third round. And Kalen Bullock, I will say, feels like the most exciting pick of their day 2 picks? Kamari Lassiter, I feel like, addresses their biggest need, which is cornerback, and the fact that he can play inside or outside. They have, I feel like, have a need, at the very least, need for competition at both. So that's a reason to like that pick. The Blake Fisher one is curious, objectively curious. We got to admit. So that's the one that raises the most eyebrows, even if he does turn out to be a fine player for them, which he very well may be. And then Kalen Bullock is the one that's got like the highlight plays. He's got the interceptions. He's got the pick sixes, right? A pick six in each of the last 2 seasons. Like, he's the one that really sort of pops on the screen. So excited about that. I think it was Aaron Wilson who asked Nick Caserio about Kalen Bullock.
Yeah, I mean, it shows up, Aaron. I mean, whatever his production is, has been pretty significant, but he's rangy. He covers ground. He plays the ball well. He has good movement skills for a safety. He started his career as a corner. I'm not saying he's a corner, but he moves well for his size. He's 6'2", 190 pounds. Honestly, some of his best football is probably in front of him. He needs to get stronger. I mean, he'll be the first to tell you that. So I think there's some developmental opportunities with him relative to his frame. We're talking about a guy at 6'2", 190 pounds, who ran 4.5, that moves well for his size, plays the ball, is instinctive, is an eraser in a deep part of the field, has to improve as a tackler, which goes back to improving his playing strength. So hopefully our program will be beneficial to him in that respect. So, and he's still a ascending player. He's only 20 years old, like 21 years old. He's a young player. He's been in college for 3 years. Played as a true freshman, so versatile player. So I'd say that was certainly a player that the head coach was excited to get on the team. So anytime you can do that, it's probably a good thing. Yeah.
So that's the other one. That's the other one, right? It's D'Amico Ryans. If you watch the video that the Texans have, or maybe might even have seen that live when they picked him, you can see him in their war room, if you will, really excited about them getting that pick. Now, that could very well be just the fact that they were able to complete the trade and pull it off. But you hear Nick Caserio talking there about his excitement, or specifically D'Amico Ryans' excitement to have Kalen Bullock. So safety's another interesting spot, man. Another interesting spot. We talked about it when all of those safeties got released. All of those all-pro safeties got released, and then some of them are still out there. It's like, hey, Texans, I know you like your safeties. I know that they're leaders on the team, well-respected guys on the team, but there's some guys out there that are objectively better than both of them. And then you look at this one, man. We'll see how it shakes out, but with the third-round magic and the tape on this kid, at least his strengths, his weaknesses are what they are, but his strengths are exactly what you're looking for, exactly why you draft a dude like that. So I'm encouraged overall, confused about drafting a tackle, not so much the player himself. You know, this is not a critique on Blake Fisher. It's just more so a curious, a question / commentary on what exactly is going on with your plan at tackle, or how much do you actually believe in your set of tackles, the starting guys that you extended the year before. So we shall see. We absolutely shall see about this. Now, I've already rambled for enough, and I wasted a lot of time by messing up that audio. Rookie mistake on my part, but a rookie mistake, like I haven't been podcasting for years. I just don't normally produce it like that. But like, I mean, I said on the top of this thing, man, I don't play a bunch of audio. I just thought those were some really good Nick Caserio cuts. Wanted to get them to you. But overall draft stuff, man, the Michael Penix Jr. pick to the Atlanta Falcons is the one that got everybody jumping. Surprised the hell out of everybody, myself included. I did not have them drafting Michael Penix Jr. at 8th overall. The obvious conflict there is you just paid Kirk Cousins $100 million plus. The $100 million is guaranteed, and he's supposed to be your answer at quarterback. And then you went and drafted an older slash injury prone or older quarterback with an injury history coming out of college, who by the way, you ideally wouldn't want to have to play over the next couple of years, especially while you're paying Kirk Cousins. Everybody understands the weirdness, awkwardness, conflict of that. And then, of course, Kirk Cousins' agent just straight out was, you know, straight to it. No, no sugarcoating, really, like, hey, man, we were caught off guard. We didn't know this until they were on the clock. This was not supposed to be part of the plan. They are not happy. They're clearly not happy. There is already, before Michael Penix even takes the field or can get his locker set up, there's already some sort of tension and quarterback controversy, not necessarily between the players themselves, but because of the situation, which is like, yo, why would you even want to create that? Why would you even want to create that? Right? They're like, that's the part. Maybe you give them credit for having the courage to do so, having the conviction to do so, if they really believe in Michael Penix Jr. But that the fact that they would even do that to me was that they would create such an environment to me was interesting in and of itself. I don't have a problem with them drafting Michael Penix at 8 overall. I'm a big Michael Penix guy. I've been saying it for a while that I think that, and I know the national championship game was what it was, but I watched them. I mean, for years, and then of course, if you looked at that Texas game, the semifinal game, if you will. The dude, I've been saying, I feel like wherever he goes, he is going to make a team very, very, very happy. Big Michael Penix guy. I don't have as much of a problem with them drafting Michael Penix, and I guess it has been framed this way a little bit, of it more so being like you paid Kirk Cousins all this money just to draft Michael Penix. But let's be clear about what the issue is here. The issue is paying the $100 million to Kirk Cousins. That's what they got wrong. They didn't get it wrong by drafting Michael Penix Jr. That part made sense. The part, and I wonder how much regret they feel even right now, because like if you just think about this, they didn't know that they'd be able to get Michael Penix at 8. You probably could have suspected that, but you didn't know for sure that you'd be able to get. There was the talk of 6 quarterbacks are going to go in the first round, and you're picking at 8. And that at least the Cardinals weren't gonna draft a quarterback, but you didn't know if somebody was gonna trade up ahead of you. You didn't know if either the 7 teams ahead of you or somebody else was gonna trade up to get one of those 6 quarterbacks. You had no way of knowing that you'd be able to get Michael Penix Jr. So it's not like you could have made him your original plan, but it does feel like it's going to come to bite them a little bit that they drafted Kirk Cousins, which this is more of a hedge than anything, right? It's like if Cousins is either ineffective / not good or injured / washed, whatever, then you do have your heir apparent. But if he is good, then you kind of waste 2 years of the first round quarterback on the rookie deal. And then you only have, I guess you have the last 3 years of his deal to decide whether there's somebody that you're going to extend. So it is a hedge in that way. But it does feel a little bit, in some ways, like a waste when you're already paying Kirk Cousins $100 million. But again, it feels like they would have been better off going the much more. They weren't willing to risk quarterback purgatory, because what if they sign some middling quarterback? What if they trade for Justin Fields or Zach Wilson and then try to draft a quarterback, and then you look up and you don't have a quarterback? They clearly didn't want to do that, but I feel like that would have been the better play. Trade for Justin Fields and draft a quarterback. Trade for Zach Wilson and draft a quarterback. Don't pay Kirk Cousins $100 million. That's just not something that I think they should have done. And now it feels like it's even confirmed, because they were able to get a quarterback that, to be fair, they didn't know they were going to be able to get, but they did. And I said this and stand by it. I'd rather have Michael Penix right now over Kirk Cousins today, yesterday, day before, tomorrow. Give me Michael Penix over Kirk Cousins. So, yeah, man, they got they got their better quarterback that they're not going to be able to play until their more expensive quarterback gives them a reason to. It's a very awkward position to be in. It's like either waiting on Kirk Cousins to fail or, hoping that he succeeds and that, Michael Penix is like, ready to take over the reins in 3 years after you've wasted $100 million and the first couple of years of a rookie deal on a quarterback. Do want to point out as well that the Atlanta Falcons last year had an opportunity, I think. Maybe they didn't. Who knows how much of an opportunity it was. But y'all remember when the Atlanta Falcons basically let it be known publicly that they were not interested in trading for Lamar Jackson, who at the time was, technically on the trade block, was allowed to be. They were allowed to have discussions for a trade for Lamar Jackson. They weren't interested in it. And I understood that, trading for it would have cost a lot to trade, and obviously had to pay Lamar Jackson because that was the whole dilemma. It was a contract situation. So I understood why teams maybe weren't interested in doing that. I don't understand why they were so eager to let the world know about it. I don't know. I didn't get that part, but I understood the logic in maybe not wanting to do all of that with Lamar Jackson. I did. But when your subsequent QB plan is to pay Kirk Cousins $100 million and to still use a first round pick on a quarterback, damn, you might as well trade it for Lamar Jackson. Because I know he's better than Kirk Cousins. I suspect and feel pretty confident that he's better than Michael Penix Jr. I like Michael Penix Jr. I don't think he's going to be as good as Lamar Jackson. We'll see. But they would have been better off trying to do that. I don't even know how possible it was. But just the idea that they were like, Lamar Jackson, first round picks in a hefty contract, nah. But Kirk Cousins, $100 million and a first round quarterback in the same offseason within 60 days or so, yeah, sign me up. Very strange to me. Very, 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 very strange. I also thought the Xavier Worthy, Keon Coleman dynamic is going to be interesting. We criticize, I feel like, and when I say we, there was a collective criticism of the Buffalo Bills essentially just handing the Kansas City Chiefs, their nemesis, and the team that they, it does not seem like they are going to be able to crack that code, especially as they go backwards here. But they just hand them Xavier Worthy, who is tailor-made for Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes. Like, if you figure there's anybody that can get the most out of an Xavier Worthy, it would be those guys. You just hand them their exact type of wide receiver that they like, help them address a need that they had, a desperate need that they have, as opposed to like picking in front of them and, like at least playing a little defense there yourself. But then they open the second round with the Keon Coleman pick, which I think is a good pick. I think everybody actually kind of wins here. It just is a little peculiar and worth pointing out that the Bills helped them win. Like, I know you get extra picks in your trade back, but they kind of help the opponent here in allowing them and gifting them Xavier Worthy. Now, if let's say maybe they would have picked Keon Coleman anyway, had they kept that last pick, then, what's the big deal, I suppose. But I mean, putting Xavier Worthy on the Kansas City Chiefs, I think, is a threat to the Bills' existence in and of itself. Keon Coleman added to the mix there, I think it obviously helps the Bills because they needed a receiver. They needed a number one guy after trading Stephon Diggs to the Texans. So, like, I think that that's going to be an interesting sidebar for years. How good is Keon Coleman? How good is Xavier Worthy? They'll both be playing on competitive teams, I imagine. But I think Xavier Worthy is going to be catching passes in the Super Bowl. I suspect that Xavier Worthy is going to have a prolific postseason career playing with Patrick Mahomes. I don't know if I can say that for Keon Coleman. They'll be in the playoffs at times. You know, I don't know about this year. They're gonna have to figure some things out. But as long as Josh Allen is there, they'll be trying to build a winner. I feel like we can criticize the way they go about it, but man, Xavier Worthy. How about that, man? Watching the Texas players go to rivals, to Tavondre Sweat going to the Titans, Xavier Worthy going to the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, what a run. What a run. I know a lot of people were underwhelmed with what the Texans did in the draft. I found all of it fascinating from a storyline standpoint. Maybe I'm not beating the table for, hey, these are going to be some great players for the Texans per se, but I was entertained. I was entertained. Hope you were as well. Subscribe to the B Block Podcast wherever it is that you get your podcast. Be sure to rate the podcast, leave a review. You can go ahead and be honest about that mess up that I had with the audio earlier, because I can't lie, man. I ain't editing it out. It's gonna be in there. If you made it to the end, shout out to you. I appreciate you, man. That's real. That's real love. Real love. Appreciate it. Y'all are really rocking with me, so I appreciate that. Again, make sure that you subscribe, rate, review, tell your people about the podcast. And until next time, y'all be good.